Hello everyone, my name is Alexandra Castellanos, and for my final leadership project, I want to explore a question that feels very simple at first, but becomes much more complex in real life. What guides leaders when values are tested? Throughout the MBA, we have talked about the leadership as a strategy, behavior, influence, and decision making. But for this project, I want to focus on the moment when leadership becomes more visible, not even when everything is stable, but when pressure, ambiguity, and trade off make the right choices less convenient. Through the three leaderships interview, I analyze how internalized moral perspective show up in practice. My central argument is that values are not providing what leaders says they believe. They are provided by the choices leaders make when the values are tested. The core tension behind this presentation is that leadership is rebel when values become more important than convenience. It's easy to describe our values when there is no cost attached. But the real test is when doing the right thing is slower, harder, less popular, or less efficient in the short term. Across the interviews, I found three recurring patterns. First, values become visible under pressure. Second, trust is built through consistency, not through one isolated statement or one inspiring moment. And third, culture follows repeated leadership signals. In other words, people learn what truly matters by watching the leaders protect, reward, explain, and correct over the time. That is why moral perspective is not only personal, it becomes operational, rational, and cultural. This project is based on the three original leadership interviews with leaders from different professional contexts. Daniel Ruiz brings a perspective connected to retail and education. Ricardo Massa brings a perspective rooted in research and public policy. Eduardo Vázquez brings a perspective from entrepreneurship and events. I intentionally choose leaders from different environments because I want to see whether the moral perspective depends mainly on the industry or there is a deeper leadership pattern across contexts. My goal was not to rank the leaders or decide who is more ethical. Instead, I look for how values become decisions under different types of pressure. I analyze the interviews using the authentic leadership framework, especially self awareness, relational transparency, balance processing, and internalized moral perspective. The course framework that anchors this analysis is authentic leadership. I find this model useful because it connects the internal world of the leader with the experience of the people around them. Self awareness helps leaders understand their values, motive base, strengths, and blind spots. Relational transparency is about communicating honestly and allowing others to understand the leader's intention. Balanced processing requires leaders to consider evidence and alternative perspectives before making decisions. An internalized moral perspective, which is the center of my project, is the ability to let internal values and ethical standards guide behaviors when outside pressure increases. The visible outcomes of this dimension is trust. Trust is not automatic. It is built when people experience a leader as consistent, honest, fair, and values driven over the time. Daniel's interview helped me understand moral perspective through the lens of consistency. The values that came through most clearly were honesty, responsibility, resilience, and empathy. What stood out to me is that Daniel does not separate ethics from everyday execution. For him, doing the right thing is closely connected to being reliable, managing expectation honestly, and not over promising. That may sound simple, but in leadership, it is actually very powerful. Many trust issues begin when leaders create expectations that cannot sustain. Daniel's case shows that moral perspective. Um, Leadership do not always appear through the dramatic ethical moments. Sometimes it appears through the quiet discipline of doing what was promises, especially when pressure creates incentives to exaggerate, delay, or avoid responsibility. His leadership builds predictability, and predictable build trust. Ricardo's interviews brought a different kind of moral pressure. His context is connected to research and public policy, where credibility depends on truth, evidence, critical thinking, and academic integrity. What I found most important is that Ricardo's moral perspective is visible not only in what he decides, but in how he protects the decision making process. In his work, there can be pressure to simplify, omit, or lower standards in order to move faster or make a conclusion easier to accept. Ricardo's case connects strongly to balance processing because he emphasizes evidence, standards, and intellectual honesty. This expands my understanding of ethical leadership. Integrity is not only about being honest with people, it is also being honest with information, complexity, and evidence. When credibility is the work, integrity becomes the product. Eduardo's interviews show a moral perspective through ownership and transparency. His leadership context involves entrepreneurship and events, where service gaps, operational changes, and unmet expectations can quickly affect trust. What stands out to me is the way he approached the gap between what was promised and what actually happened. Instead of protecting image first, his leadership response is to name the reality, own the consequence, and protect the relationship and adapt the plan. The sequence matters because it turns accountability into visible behavior. Eduardo's case connects strongly to relational transparency and giving voice to value. He shows that accountability is not only about accepting blame, it is about communicating honestly, staying service oriented, and protecting trust when circumstances become uncomfortable. In his case, transparency becomes a practical form of moral perspective. When I compare the three leaders, the strongest insight is that their contexts are different, but the moral mechanism is similar. Daniel builds through consistency. Ricardo builds trust through integrity. Eduardo builds trust through ownership. Each one faces a different pressure point. Operational reliability, protection of truth, or service gap and unmet expectations. But in every case, moral perspective becomes visible when values guide behavior under pressure. The ethical risks are also different. In the case of Daniel, he helps prevent broken trust. Ricardo helps prevent distorted judgment. And Eduardo helps prevent eroded relationships. This is where the analysis move beyond interview summary. The interview suggests that internalized moral perspective is not limited to one industry or one leadership style. It becomes visible whenever leaders repeatedly align action with every principle. Across the interviews, I did identify a practical model. Personal values become decisions under pressure. Those decisions become repeated leadership signals, and repeated signals eventually shape culture. This is one of the most important findings of my project because values that remain private do not create leadership impact. They become meaningful when other people can observe them in decisions, especially difficult decisions. This connect to the course concept of leadership crucibles because pressure reveals whether the values are genuinely internalized or only aspirational. It is also connected to moral reasoning, perspective taking, balance processing, and relational transparency, and giving voice to those values. Culture is not created only through values statements or inspirational speeches. Culture is created by what leaders repeatedly protect, reward, tolerate, explain, and, of course, correct those actions. This project also made me reflect on my own leadership. I work in a high pressure environment in international higher education, where trust performance, family decisions, and the team development intersect every day. Families are making a significant educational and financial decision, so trust matters as much as conversion. As a manager, I am also learning that my role is not to solve every problem myself, but to develop people who can make those decisions independently. And as a working mother, finishing my MBA, leadership values feel more human, immediate to me now. So my challenge is to lead with empathy without losing that clarity and protect results with sacrificing trust. The biggest lesson that I take from this project is that values based leadership cannot be improvised only when pressure arrives. It has it has to be designed in advantage through habits, guardrails, and not negotiables. The practical implications of this project are clear. First, leaders should name their non negotiables before pressure arrives. Second, they should build decision guardrails such questions, pauses, and routines that protect judgment when stress increases. Third, they should make values observable by translating them into behaviors that others can see and repeat. Fourth, they should measure trust, not only outcomes. Results matter, but so do voice. Credibility, psychological safety, and whether people make principled decisions without constant supervisions. For me, the strongest takeaways is that trust is the compound interest of repeated values decisions. And as I close this MBA journey, I will carry this idea with me. Leadership is not only tested when values are easy, it is tested when values becomes expensive. Values are not proven by what leaders claim. They are proven by what leaders choose. And thank you so much. And thank you so much for watch my final project.